Perseus and the Gorgon's Head. In the Aegean Sea, between Greece and Turkey, there are many islands. One of these is called Seriphos. One day, Dictys, a fisherman of Seriphos, was walking along the beach near his home. He was surprised to see a large chest at the edge of the sea. The waves were lapping against it. He pulled it slowly, little by little, onto the sand, away from the sea. It was very heavy. Then he stood looking at it, almost afraid to open it. What could be inside? Dictys hoped there might be treasure in it, for he was a poor man. At last he plucked up courage and raised the lid. He was filled with amazement. A beautiful girl looked up at him, and in her arms was a baby. The girl was called Danae, and she was the daughter of King Acrisius. A prophet had told Acrisius that his grandson would kill him, and Acrisius had locked Danae up in a tower of brass so that she could not get married and have children. In spite of this, Zeus, king of the gods, had married her secretly. Then Acrisius was told that Danae had given birth to a son, and he was frightened. He did not want to kill Danae, so he had her and the baby put into a chest and had them cast into the sea. When Dictys opened the chest and found them, he took them to his hut and looked after them. The baby grew into a strong young man. His mother called him Perseus. She always said that his father was Zeus, king of the gods. The king of Seriphos was Polydectes. He was a cruel man, and all the people of the island feared him. When he met Danae, who was very beautiful, he fell in love with her. He wanted her to marry him, but Danae had heard of his cruelty, and she refused. She did not really want to marry anybody, because she was quite happy. One day, Polydectes held a feast, to which he invited all the nobles of the island. He invited Danae as well, so that he could spread his riches before her and persuade her to marry him. The young Perseus too went to the palace. He was not invited, but he slipped in amongst the crowds. He wanted to protect his mother from the king, for he knew she feared him. During the feast, Polydectes turned to Danae. "Come, my love," he said, smiling. "Let us make this our marriage day for all to see. If you will be my queen, you shall have all that your heart can desire." Danae shook her head.
"I am content, Polydectes, and do not wish to marry again,"
she replied. The king still smiled, though he was becoming angry. Then Perseus stepped forth from the crowd and spoke boldly.
"My mother does not wish to marry you, O king. Let her live in peace."
The king's eyes blazed with anger. He knew he could never win Danae for his wife so long as Perseus was there to protect her. "Danae may live in peace if you will accept a challenge," Polydectes said cunningly. "Are you brave enough?" he asked. Perseus nodded. The king laughed in triumph. "Then I challenge you, Perseus, to bring me a Gorgon's head." Perseus stepped back in horror. He was trapped. He could not refuse. But how could he bring back a Gorgon's head? He left the palace with the laughter of Polydectes ringing in his ears. There were 3 Gorgons. Once they had been beautiful women, but they had boasted about their beauty. The gods had punished their vanity by turning them into hideous monsters. They had bronze wings, claw-like hands, tusks for teeth, and snakes for hair. One look into a Gorgon's eyes would instantly turn a man to stone. Perseus walked sadly away from the palace. How could he find the Gorgons and kill one of them? He knew that Polydectes was sending him to certain death. Suddenly, there was a blinding flash of light. Then he saw that there were 2 figures standing before him. One spoke.
Perseus, we have been sent by your father Zeus to help you. I am Athena, goddess of wisdom, and this is Hermes, messenger of the gods. Take these gifts and travel northwards until you come to the sea. There you may seek help from the 3 grey sisters.
In another flash, the figures were gone. Perseus eagerly looked at their gifts. A sharp, curved sickle, a bright polished shield, a bag to hang from his shoulder, a cap, and a pair of winged sandals. With such help from the gods, surely he must succeed in his task. Perseus found that with the magic sandals he could fly. With the cap on his head, he was invisible. With new hope he flew north, over the mountains of Europe, on his way to find the Gorgons. He flew for a long, long time, and at last came to the shore of a dark, misty sea. He did not know where he was, nor where to look for the Gorgons. Then he saw the grey sisters on the beach below. They were old and ugly, with only one eye and one tooth to share between them. They were the only people who knew where the Gorgons lived, and they would not tell Perseus the way. Putting on his cap, Perseus hovered above them and waited. Then he swooped down and snatched away the eye and the tooth as one sister was passing them to another.
Tell me where to find the Gorgons, or I will throw your eye and your tooth into the sea,
he jeered. Trembling with fear and anger, the grey sisters gave Perseus his directions. Dropping their eye and their tooth onto the beach beside them, he flew on towards the Gorgon's lair. Entering the dusky twilight land where the monsters lived, Perseus saw around him still grey figures of men and animals. One look into the eyes of the Gorgons had turned them to stone. Perseus's blood ran cold within him. How could he succeed where so many others had failed? At last, Perseus found the Gorgons. They were asleep among the rocks, and Perseus was able to look at them safely. Although they were asleep, the live serpents which formed their hair were writhing venomously. The sight filled Perseus with horror. How could he get near enough without being turned to stone? Suddenly, Perseus knew what to do. He now understood why Athena had given him the shining bronze shield. Looking into it, he saw clearly the reflection of the Gorgons. Using the shield as a mirror, he crept forward. Then, with a single swift blow, he cut off the head of the nearest Gorgon. Her name was Medusa. In one mighty swoop, Perseus grabbed the head of Medusa. He placed it safely in his bag and sprang into the air on his winged sandals. As Perseus leapt into the air, the other 2 Gorgons came after him, screaming. The serpents on their heads hissed and writhed, and the Gorgon's wicked claws were outstretched to grasp him. But he was too quick for them. The powerful wings on his sandals soon carried him out of their evil reach. Their claws gripped the empty air behind his heels as Perseus flew to safety. The 2 Gorgons turned to see the lifeless body of their sister Medusa lying on the ground. As they watched, there sprang from her blood the white-winged horse, Pegasus, the symbol of grace and beauty. As Perseus passed over one of the islands, he saw a strange sight. A young girl was standing chained to a rock beside the sea. Swiftly, Perseus flew down and landed beside her. The girl was crying with fear.
Who are you?
He asked, freeing her.
And who has chained you up like this?
The girl was very frightened, but answered Perseus.
My name is Andromeda, and my father placed me here. My mother boasted that I was more beautiful than the sea nymphs, and the god of the sea, Poseidon, sent a sea monster to terrorize our island in punishment. The gods have told my father that the sea monster will only go away if I am sacrificed to it.
She cried bitterly as she told Perseus the story.
Take my hand, and we will fly from this monster,
said Perseus. Suddenly, the girl pointed.
Look!
She screamed.
The monster!
Perseus turned, and there was a huge beast coming out of the sea.
Have no fear,
the hero cried.
I have a weapon that no monster can withstand.
As he said this, he raised the Gorgon's head in the face of the monster. Instantly, the beast was turned to stone. So Perseus saved the life of Andromeda and took her to Seriphos to be his wife. When they came to Seriphos, Perseus went to the king's palace, for he had not forgotten Polydectes' villainy. He took with him the Gorgon's head and found the king and his friends feasting. They had no thought that Perseus would ever return. When Perseus entered, Polydectes was annoyed. "What are you doing here?" he said with a scowl.
I have kept my promise,
said Perseus.
I have brought you a Gorgon's head.
Polydectes and his friends laughed. "You're lying," shouted the king. "No man could bring back a Gorgon's head." Perseus pulled out the head and held it up for all to see.
See for yourselves,
he cried. Polydectes and his friends looked at the head and at once were turned to stone. Perseus gave back the gifts of the gods and presented Athena with the Gorgon's head to place upon her shield in gratitude for her help.